Welcome to the What's Happening Birmingham video podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Jarvis Scott with What's Happening Birmingham podcast. Today, I have the honor and pleasure with Abbe Smith. She is a professor of law at Georgetown School of Law. Thank you, Professor, for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. All the way from Washington, D.C., we're meeting via Zoom. I want to bring Abbe on today. I want to say Professor Smith on today to talk about the trial of Judge Tracie A. Todd that started last week at the Alabama Supreme Court, but is resuming December 1st and the 2nd. So, Professor Smith, can you give us a little more information about this case that's pending before Judge Todd?
Well, Judge Todd has been hauled before the Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission for allegedly violating the Alabama canons of judicial conduct, which the canons are essentially a set of standards that judges are supposed to comply with. And they've hauled her before the commission on what I think are utterly baseless grounds. They're suggesting that she violated some of the core canons having to do with being faithful to the law, maintaining professional competence, being unswayed by partisan interests, clamor, or fear of criticism. In my opinion, and I've been teaching and writing about legal ethics for more than 25 years, Judge Todd is an exemplary judge and does not deserve to be hauled before any judicial commission. The backdrop of the case is that some prosecutors took issue with Judge Todd's rulings in a capital case. Mm-hmm. She did what any good judge does, and she researched the law deeply and with some breadth, and was actually rather prescient in her research because she found that the Alabama capital murder scheme was unconstitutional, which is something that a federal circuit court had already held, and the U.S. Supreme Court would later agree with. Mm-hmm. And in particular, she found that the part of the scheme that allowed judges to overturn jury decisions at the penalty phase of a capital murder case. That is, if a jury ruled that life without the possibility of parole was the appropriate sentence, judges in Alabama were free to overturn that jury decision and sentence a person to death. She thought that scheme ran afoul of the United States Constitution, and it turns out the U.S. Supremes ended up agreeing with her. But meanwhile, this disciplinary process had been begun, and it's been going on for some time now, for more than a couple of years, I think. And now she finally has a chance at a hearing. But I have to say this, and it's puzzling to me, because the reason you're talking to me is I was going to be a witness on Judge Todd's behalf to talk about the Alabama canons of judicial conduct and the allegations against Judge Todd. The commission objected to my testimony, objected to Judge Todd calling an ethics expert at a hearing where she's defending, frankly, both her professional reputation and her personal reputation. And a court granted that objection and precluded my testimony. That feels wrong to me too. It's not about me. It's that certainly a judge who's given her life to public service, and that's who Judge Todd is. She was a prosecutor for many years who, frankly, had sought and obtained death verdicts in capital murder cases as a prosecutor. She is no ideologue. She just happens to be faithful to the law as a judge. And that's the basis of her position on capital murder cases. I just think it's wrong. I'm not sure why the commission that's hearing her disciplinary case wouldn't want to hear from somebody who's thought about, researched, and wrote about and teaches about ethics. I'm not sure why that wouldn't be helpful. And it doesn't have to be me. She could, call anybody she wants. But I think it's odd that they're not giving her a chance to fully defend herself and her reputation.
So, according to your legal expertise and your interpretation of the Alabama state law, were Judge Todd operating in her according to her rights to issue these rulings, in her discretion? I guess in so many words, when it came to the sentencing.
Right. My overall opinion is that Judge Todd frankly exemplifies the highest standards of integrity and independence. Those are two words that are part of the canons, because she consistently, as a judge, acted without fear or favor in her principled and very well-reasoned judgments and rulings. And, the language of the canons is pretty broad, but phrases such as faithful to the law, maintained professional competence, unswayed by partisan interests, all of those things, are embraced by Judge Todd. And I think she's being pilloried now, not because she's been unfaithful to law, but because she is an independent thinker. And that's, so here's how our adversarial system works.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be a neutral, disinterested judge at the center of it, because in our adversarial system, we've got the defense advocating zealously on behalf of the criminal defendant. We have the prosecutor who's supposed to do justice and supposed to strive for that. But inevitably in a trial proceeding, the two sides go at it, and a judge is supposed to be an arbiter. And her independence is key. And Judge Todd has more than demonstrated that. If I might, let me get into some of the specific allegations against her, just to show how absurd they are. One of the allegations is that Judge Todd erred. In other words, she violated the judicial canons by conducting her own research into matters before her. In other words, she didn't consider herself to be bound by the law as argued or presented by the parties. She thought she could go deeper. And judges have a singular responsibility to the law. And in my experience, in my opinion, wise judges do what they can to be broadly and deeply knowledgeable about law. They're not bound by what is argued by the parties. Look, I could be pretty concrete about it. One of the reasons judges typically hire judicial law clerks is to help them thoroughly research the law and to go beyond what the parties might be presenting. So, that's just one example that I think is just patently absurd. Of course, judges ought to be mindful of what other courts are deciding, both in courts in the jurisdiction in which they preside, so other courts in Alabama, but also the federal courts, the U.S. Supreme Court. That's, in the end, that's the law. And I think that Judge Todd did exactly the right thing by researching the law, and frankly, also researching law review articles and commentary on the death penalty, some of which is critical of what was then the Florida scheme and the Alabama scheme. Alabama was an outlier in allowing judges to overturn jury sentencing decisions. So, not for nothing, you need an independent judge who's willing to stick her neck out and say, there's something wrong with this. Now, that doesn't make her popular. Frankly, the opposite is true. I mean, there have been studies that show that in jurisdictions where judges are elected, like Alabama,
Mhm.
judges basically get voted out of office if they're perceived to be quote unquote soft on crime. There are any number of examples of well-known, very impressive jurists in Tennessee and California who lost their seats on high courts because of their decisions on capital cases. So, Judge Todd, I think, is associating herself with some of the best minds on the bench in the country. And, I think it's absurd to have such a narrow view of what judges do. There was also an allegation that she engaged in some sort of misconduct by ejecting a prosecutor from her courtroom. Now, number one, it's not unusual for judges to eject lawyers from their courtrooms.
Okay.
It's not my favorite practice, but it's perfectly appropriate. And some would say it's rather restrained. I mean, judges have the power of contempt. They could hold a lawyer in contempt of court. They could order that the lawyer be taken to the cell block until such time as a hearing is held. And unfortunately, that behavior by judges is fairly commonplace. But Judge Todd was restrained. She didn't lock anybody up. She didn't cite any prosecutor with contempt. When the prosecutor kept talking, notwithstanding the judge saying, "I've heard your argument enough," when a lawyer keeps talking, that's the kind of thing that, gets under a judge's skin. And all she did was she ejected him. I don't see what's wrong with that. And frankly, Canon 3 of Alabama's judicial canons states that judges must maintain order and decorum in proceedings before them. And in doing so, judges have enormous discretion, including ejecting lawyers, holding lawyers in contempt, filing disciplinary charges against lawyers. I bet that lawyer who was ejected from Judge Todd's courtroom was happy, relatively speaking, that he wasn't either cited for contempt or, cited for violating the lawyer disciplinary code. Instead, Judge Todd said, "You need to leave my courtroom and your office should send another prosecutor." What the canons say explicitly, Canon 3.7, a judge should take or initiate appropriate disciplinary measures against a judge or lawyer for unprofessional conduct of which the judge has personal knowledge. Well, so that's pretty specific, that Judge Todd was supposed to do something in the face of a lawyer who was engaging in unprofessional or disrespectful conduct. So I think that was rather lenient on her part.
How did you hear about this case?
So Judge Todd's legal team reached out to me. They had called around, I hadn't heard of the case. In fact, I would like this case to get more national coverage. So I hope this podcast has wheels. Because I think more people should know about this. Judge Todd, is one of a handful of African-American women judges in Alabama. My understanding is that she may be the only African-American woman judge presiding over murder cases. This feels politically motivated. It may well be racially motivated. I heard about the case because they reached out to me. They'd been trying to find an expert on ethics who could testify. And a lot of my colleagues, and this was my reaction at first too, and law professors are not usually that humble, but she'd reached out to a number of other legal ethics professors who said, "Well, I just don't have a specific expertise in judicial ethics." None of us do. It'd be sort of a rare thing for somebody who was, an expert in or a scholar of professional responsibility or legal ethics to just focus on judges. As it happens, I'm the co-author of a book called Understanding Lawyers' Ethics that devotes a chapter to judicial ethics, and it's something I teach and it's something I'm familiar with. So when I learned more about her case, I agreed to help out if I could.
So, okay, so the way this case is going on, what is the outcome or the ruling from this? Can they potentially rule to, wouldn't say, is the word impeach or remove this?
They could kick her off the bench.
Okay.
They have the power to remove her from the bench, and I think that would be a travesty. I don't think she's done anything wrong. One of the other allegations, by the way, is that in a husband and wife domestic violence case, the suggestion was that it was unethical for Judge Todd to question the district attorney's actions in dropping charges against the husband in exchange for the husband providing assistance to the state on other matters. She asked a question about, the office's policy or practice with regard to notification of a victim before charges are dropped. There's nothing wrong with a judge asking that question. I've practiced in a number of jurisdictions. I practiced in New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Maryland, Washington, D.C. And there's nothing that says a judge can't ask a prosecutor about whether a particular prosecutor's actions are consistent with their office's policy. I mean, a judge can ask. They may not have the power to do anything about it, but they can certainly ask, and they can scold. They can suggest that the prosecutor is acting inconsistently. There's nothing wrong with that. The other suggestion, the other allegation was about some public statements the judge made, and there's a good body of law that says the judges don't lose all First Amendment rights simply by ascending to the bench. And I took a look at the allegations. I don't see anything that she said to contravene the canons of judicial ethics.
So, I mean, with this case aside, one of the things, I always like to say your professional opinion. What are some things you feel needs to be changed in Alabama when it comes to matters like this? Because the judges, pretty much most of the judges here are, like you said, elected by the people.
So that part feels troubling to me. The people elected Judge Todd. She's in one of the more racially diverse parts of Alabama. It could well feel to the voters that some judicial commission is taking away their right to select who they want as a judge, and that the judicial commission is just kind of randomly picking out somebody who reflects the people of Jefferson County or Birmingham. And I think people vote for judges in the same sort of spirit these days as they vote for district attorneys who are elected. And we're starting to see something of what some people regard as a movement to elect more progressive prosecutors, to do something to turn the tide of mass incarceration in this country. There have been expressly anti-death penalty prosecutors who've been elected because the people didn't want their prosecutors to be killing people anymore, and have elected judges who would at least be thoughtful about capital punishment. And there's nothing in the record to suggest that Judge Todd would never impose such a sentence, that she's unable to abide by the law. There's nothing to suggest that that is so. And as I pointed out, when she was a prosecutor, on a number of occasions, she sought and obtained capital murder convictions. So I just sort of don't get it. And I do think it's troubling, because we live in a time when it feels like the right to vote has become more and more fragile by virtue of gerrymandering, by virtue of voter suppression writ large. And so here's an instance where somebody could, actually fairly reflect the community and also be a very thoughtful, wise judge. Why should she be removed? If you believe in electing judges, then let democratic processes play out. If the electorate doesn't like what she's doing, they'll vote her off the bench. But the reasons that she's been brought up before the Judicial Commission feel really specious to me.
Well, and the other thing about it too is, and I want you to make sure I'm correct with this. Let's hypothetically speak, they ruled to remove her from the bench. Then by the Alabama Constitution, the governor can appoint someone to fill out the remainder of the term. Is that correct?
I'm not, I'm the wrong person to ask that. So I'm not familiar with how the politics of it work in Alabama, but I imagine if there's a vacancy, somebody's got the power to fill it before an election. That often happens, especially if there's a real need in a busy jurisdiction. And I imagine Jefferson County is a pretty busy jurisdiction. But yeah, that would feel wrong if I was a voter in Birmingham and somehow the governor got to pick who my judges were when they're supposed to be elected locally. And that would feel bad. But I just feel, I feel like people should care about this one, which is why I think it's a story that ought to have national coverage, and that people certainly in Alabama ought to hear about this. Alabama is a state that was like famous for Roy Moore. Here's a really good, thoughtful, hardworking judge who's done nothing but give her life to public service. Mm-hmm. And, she's got hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal fees just for defending herself against these allegations. She's not a corporate lawyer. She's not making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. She made a decision to kind of devote her career first to criminal prosecution and now to being a fair and dispassionate judge on the bench. We need judges like Judge Todd. It'd be really a shame if she were removed.
Well, if you're watching this podcast right now, you're probably sitting there, if you kind of heard what we've been kind of discussing over the last few minutes, you're probably sitting here thinking like, what can I do about this? Well, I got some information for you all, and I won't say that this could possibly change, at any moment. If it do, I'll continue to send you all updates, and you all can, go to my website or newsletter, I'll tell you. But the information that Judge Todd Kemp wanted me to convey to you all, the viewers, is that the trial of Judge Tracie Todd will resume December 1st, 2nd at Alabama Supreme Court, beginning at 8:30 a.m. She's asking all friends, supporters, people who watch this podcast, please come out and support. However, if you want to go actually down there to Montgomery, buses have been organized to leave from New Pilgrim Baptist Church, 708 Goldwater Place, Birmingham, Alabama, 35211, both days at no cost. For more information and bus reservations, contact Deborah Power at 205-541-4486 or dp63@yahoo.com. But you all know how I do. I usually have the text on the email and on the podcast anyway. But I just wanted to say that out loud for the people who are listening to our podcast on Apple Podcasts. So, any final thoughts, Abby?
I think maybe people ought to write to the Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission as well. If you can't get your body down there to support Judge Todd, write to them and say, especially those of you who are from Jefferson County, Birmingham area, you voted to elect this judge. That other thing I should point is that often a really tiny turnout for judicial elections. It's hard to get people interested. Here's a judge who's really good. Write to the commission and say you think it's wrong to try to remove her from the bench, to try to discipline her, that you believe she's a good judge, you believe in her. And, write an op-ed for your local newspaper if you feel strongly. Go online. You can research Judge Todd's case, and I think some of the materials are now available online. Are they not?
Well, I think Google, but I'm probably add a little bit more information as well. But the thing I want to add too is that you all have known over the years, I've interviewed several candidates that's running for office, especially, and probably going to interview a couple coming up in this upcoming 2022 season. Just don't, when you, like you said, in these judicial elections, it's always low turnout. Not only vote for people that's running, but also look up and down that ballot, because that's just as important, because these people, the people who are like you said, that could possibly determine Judge Todd's fate, you may didn't pay attention up and down the ballot on those, the high ones in the Alabama Supreme Court. Those matter as well. It's the people that's closer to you. I know a lot of times, a lot of people like to always vote in the presidential elections, but it's the local elections or these off-year elections that mean more and that can affect your everyday life. And let's just say, hypothetically speaking, if she was removed from office, and if I'm wrong by this, but based on my research, I always tell people I'm not a professional. I think the governor can possibly appoint someone, and our governor here is Republican. So you all do the math on that one. So, we have to, possibly look and see when we have these races that we not only take care of local, but we also take care of our state and our federal, but our state most importantly. We have to take care of that in order to make sure that we're getting the representation that we want, because I always tell people like this: either you or somebody is going to face a judge at some point in their life. And 9 times out of 10, you want to face a judge or be before a judge that is fair, that one that could understand your situation and what you've been through your life. So just let that kind of marinate for a second and everything.
Look, it's really true. We need fair judges. We can't allow prosecutors in a bad mood to file complaints against judges just because they either rule against them or they try to control their courtrooms in the face of an obstreperous prosecutor. That just can't be. The people have to decide who they want as judges. It can't be individual prosecutors.
And then even the law here in Alabama that, like you said, got changed a while back, where we're only very few states that, where a judge can overrule a jury ruling or a jury verdict for sentencing and say, oh, okay, I know you said life in prison, but I'm gonna give that person the death penalty.
Death.
Where the death penalty already is currently being disputed, even if the death penalty is, whether you believe in it or I believe in it, there's constantly going on in the Supreme Court right now, whether that's constitutional or not. So,
and Alabama has not a very proud history of imposing the death penalty, far more than states with 5 times the population of Alabama. And I just think it's important for, a judge steeped in the law who cares about justice to call that out and to make the kind of rulings Judge Todd has made.
Okay, well, Abbe, I want to thank you for coming on today to kind of give us, your legal analysis and kind of breaking down this case, kind of to the average viewer, and also bring awareness to it. That I know while this podcast is being taped, they're in the midst of Thanksgiving holiday season, but we can't really take our eye off the ball, because really in issues like this, and I'm not trying to use the pun, this is kind of life or death. In so many words, not life or death as far as her life is at stake, but her history and her career as being a judge, being in the law, is at stake over particular decisions and rulings with, according to your opinion, she was in her purview and her right that was not illegal or unethical.
She did nothing wrong. She did absolutely nothing wrong. So I hopefully your viewers just get that last point. She's a very strong, very smart, very accomplished African-American woman judge who did nothing wrong. And they're trying to take her down. So let's not let that happen.
All right. Well, thank you, Abbe, for coming on today. Thank you all for watching. And like I said, I know this is around Thanksgiving, but I want everybody to please share this video. I put on all my different networks. Please share the video on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Share the link on Apple Podcasts. Please share the email blast I send out. So if y'all please pay attention to this. And also if you want to, go down next week on the 1st and the 2nd of December to be in person, the more numbers, the better. Please give, let me show you a number. Call Deborah Powell at 205-541-4486 or dp63@yahoo.com. Thank you all for watching this video. Please check out what'shappenedbirmingham.com for more interviews. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank y'all again. And Apple Podcasts, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye. And enjoy your happy Thanksgiving weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for watching the What's Happening Birmingham video podcast. Please check out our website, app, or subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest videos today.